3, hit it!
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's Caffeine for the Soul. If you enjoy these podcasts, please do subscribe and share with friends. And if this is the first time you're listening, welcome, and you can decide whether or not to share and subscribe and rate it when we're done. So I've been teaching a program over the last few weeks called Get Shit Done. And the course has really been about taking a look at productivity from a different place, looking in the direction of effortless productivity. And one of the things that I've seen in my work with high performers in a variety of fields over the last 30 years is that the real key to productivity is less to do with time or strategy than it is to do with bandwidth. And if you're not familiar with the idea of bandwidth, you can think of it like headspace. Like, how much bandwidth do you have right now? How much headspace do you have? Like, how full is your bottle? You can, if you imagine just like one of those 2-liter bottles of soda, and if it's pretty full, you can't get anything else in there, whether you're trying to get it in from the top or from the bottom, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So when I think of how our head fills up, there's kind of two ways that it fills up. We fill it from the outside. In other words, we take in lots of input, but then also it fills up from the inside, both with fresh ideas and possibilities, and also with the same old habitual stale soda that pops into our head. And the more bandwidth you have, the more receptive you are able to be, the more you're able to take in, and the more you're able to reflect, and the more fresh thought you're able to allow through. So when your bandwidth is really narrow, like a really narrow straw or a really narrow hose, not much can get through it. When your bandwidth gets wider, all sorts of things can come through. And so in that sense, noticing where your bandwidth is incredibly helpful when you're being productive. Because you have limited bandwidth, there's a lot of things that it's probably not worth doing because you're going to get diminishing returns. But when your bandwidth expands back out, there's a bunch more stuff you can take on. And it's something that you can get a feel for. You start to get a feel for what it's like for you when you have limited bandwidth. And they're just things that okay, if I can not do this now, I'm going to not do this now. And if I can't not do this now, it's not going to go great, so I can drop my expectations of myself a little bit. But when I do have the choice, I'm going to just make use of those high bandwidth moments to take on more. Now, the thing that most people don't realize, even if they have a sense of bandwidth, is that the vast majority of our bandwidth is taken up with our permission. So think about a browser. If you have a browser open and imagine having like 30 tabs open on your browser, and I saw a meme actually the other day that said, I have 30 tabs open and 5 browser windows and there's music and I can't figure out where the music is coming from. Like, we've all kind of probably had that experience on our computers, but we don't realize we're having that same experience in our brain. And the reason that all those tabs are open is because we don't have our own permission to close them. So, something to look at when something comes up in your mind. You notice you're of limited bandwidth there. What are some open tabs, and would it be okay with you to close them for now? You can always reopen them later, but you don't have to keep them open all the time. You don't have to keep thinking about that conversation you had with that person all that time. You don't have to keep worrying about that thing that might happen maybe one day if you don't or if you do. You can close those tabs anytime you want, but you do need your own permission. Now, when people start to see how much of a difference bandwidth makes to productivity, they start to realize how cheaply they give it away. Right? In the advertising world, in print, there are certain places where ad space is more valuable than other places, and more ad space costs more. So if you want to take a Super Bowl ad, that's not print, but that's probably the most common example, you're going to spend millions a minute for that to get a piece of that bandwidth. Well, the bandwidth in your head is worth as much as Super Bowl ads are. It's that precious because it's the key to increasing productivity. And yet, we give it away to anybody. We give it away to a spam caller. We give it away to a friend who just wants a minute of our time. We give it away to a colleague who, hey, can you just take a look at it? We give it away, most of all, to our own habitual thinking. And so, if you want to play with this, there's a couple of ways that you can begin to play with it that I found pretty helpful. One is simply recognizing the power of bandwidth. Start noticing this week. When are you trying to get stuff done with very limited bandwidth? And how different is that to your experience of what you can get done when your bandwidth is high, when you got a lot of headspace? And you can start to look at when your bandwidth is taken up and you have all these tabs open, okay, can I close it? What do I have permission even to close them down? And how did these tabs get open anyways? Did I open them deliberately, or did somebody else just pop it up? And I went, oh, okay, I guess I got to keep this tab open. I got to get back to this person. Oh, I got to get back to that person. How cheaply are you giving this precious real estate away? And what if you didn't? And finally, what are bandwidth bandits and bandwidth boosters? Because for all of us, there are things that suck up our bandwidth, that fill up our headspace really quickly, and other things that give it back. So for me, the biggest bandwidth bandit I've found is imaginary conversations. And what I mean by an imaginary conversation, it's a conversation with an imaginary person. They might look like somebody I know, but if the person you're arguing with is not in the room with you, if their lips aren't moving, if they are in the room with you, that's an imaginary conversation. And I've noticed for me that imaginary conversations were eating up huge chunks of my bandwidth. And when I cut them out, I got a ton of bandwidth back. Bandwidth boosters, for me, one of the biggest bandwidth boosters I have is a morning coffee ritual. Takes about an hour. It's utterly unnecessary because I can make myself a cup at home, but I take the dogs, I drive 20 minutes to a coffee place, I get a coffee, I walk the dogs, I drive back. But I have so much more bandwidth at the end of that hour than I did at the beginning, that it's a massive net positive. So what are your bandwidth bandits? What are your bandwidth boosters? Have fun, learn heaps, happy exploring, and I'll talk with you soon.